active versus passive voice? Maybe you dimly remember it, you learned it at some point in high school, right? So active voice sentences focus on who or what did what. So that would be the Jenna walked the dog sentence. My dog ate my homework. Dog subject did the action of eating the homework. The thief stole Jeff's wallet. Jenna walked the dog. Now, there's a secondary way, right, as we saw, where the sentences kind of change their word order a little bit. It changes the focus. And these are passive sentences that focus on what was done or who or what was the victim or receiver of that action. So that would be the dog receiving the action of Jenna deciding to take her on a walk. Or another one, my homework was eaten, Jeff's wallet was stolen. So sometimes, very, very rarely, you need the passive voice, but for most of the time we're going to say, stay away from it. So thinking back to the Professor Seed paragraph, right, we came across some sentences that were kind of hard to read, they tripped us up, they sounded really funky and like they had extra words in them. That's usually what happens when your writing slips into this passive voice. It's focusing on who was sort of the receiver or the victim of the action of a verb rather than who did the action. So those are good ones to write down, to remember. So, why do we care? Why does this matter? A couple of reasons. So we really want to stay in the active voice as much as possible. Insofar as it's possible, it is a lot more clear, it makes a lot more sense, and you stay away from getting wordy and confusing. If you keep your sentences in active voice, they're straightforward, you have a subject, and the subject is doing that verb, rather than switching it around and having the subject be like the recipient of an action. So here's an example that we saw earlier. A bad day was had by Professor Seed. So here we have that helping verb situation, right? And versus Professor Seed had a bad day. So here's our active voice, here's our passive voice. Now, from these examples here, can you tell me which one you prefer and why?
First one.
How come? Yeah, Janet, why?
The first one because it's straightforward.
Okay. Why is the second one not straightforward?
Just makes it seem more complicated.
Be worded differently,
Mm-hmm. Basically, I think because it takes more brain power to like decipher what's going on here in the second sentence, because the first idea or the first kind of thing that we're exposed to in this sentence is a bad day. And that's a very abstract idea, right? Like lots of people could have bad days. Bad days could mean a lot of things to different people. And then we get to our verbs. So we're like, okay, good, there's a verb in here, it's a sentence. By Professor Seed. So it takes us all the way to the end of the sentence to really understand like who the bad day was about, right? Or who is relating to this bad day. And so at this point, we have to read the whole sentence, get to Professor Seed, and then we almost have to like backtrack and go, oh, okay, he's the one who had the bad day. And so it just creates a lot more kind of room for your reader to get lost. Say you have a passive voice sentence that's like really long, right? It's kind of long, kind of complex. You have a good idea in there, but by the time your reader gets to the end of that sentence, they're a little bit lost because you're not starting with, you know, your concrete subject here who has done the action or who's existing in a certain state that you're describing if you're using like a linking verb. Okay, are we all with me so far? Any questions about this stuff? All right, so we're going to go on. So in your workbook for your homework, and then also later on in your unit test that's coming down at the end of this month, you are going to be asked to identify whether a sentence is in active voice or whether a sentence is in passive voice. And then you're going to be asked, if it's in passive voice, how do you rewrite it? How do you change it in order to be in active voice? And this, of course, is to model helping you figure that out in your own writing, right, in your essays. Like if you slip into that passive voice, you know, what are you going to do? What are your sort of tools to kind of write that sentence and put it into the active voice? So we have two steps here. Look for your verb first, right? If you've kind of picked up nothing else from grammar in this class yet, it's like look at the verb first, and that can help you kind of decipher everything else you need to know about the sentence. So if there is a form of to be, right, if we have a helping verb, it might be passive. It doesn't have to be, right? We've seen a lot of really good, respectable, good sentences that have helping verbs in them. They're very, very normal. They happen all the time. But it's also sort of a clue in that you could say, okay, if there is a helping verb going on, now I've got to kind of figure out maybe it's passive, maybe it's active. So here we have the cookies were eaten by my pit bull. Joe was buying a burnt pizza. Joe likes Gianna. So we're figuring out our verbs. And then, of course, we look for the subject once we have that verb. And now, find the main action of the sentence. So we figured out that were eaten is our whole verb, but like what's really the action going on, right? It's eating. And then we can ask ourselves, okay, is the subject doing the main action of the sentence? If not, it's passive. And if so, it's active. So what does that all mean? Basically, here we have the cookies were eaten by my pit bull, right? So we figured out cookies is my subject, were eaten is the whole verb, but really the action going on is eating. And so who's doing the eating in this sentence?
My pit bull.
The pit bull. Now, is the pit bull the subject as it is written here? No. So then we know that this is in passive voice. And the reason, I think the reason why they were turned active and passive kind of is really straightforward and makes sense, right? Because in an active voice, our subject is doing an action, right? Our subject is active. He or she is in control of whatever action is going on in that sentence. In the passive voice, what does that word passive mean? Yeah.
Past tense?
No, passive is different than past tense. And that's actually a really good clarification that we should make right now. If I can find my pen. Because a lot of people kind of get confused and think it's got that like pass kind of at the beginning of it. So they think we're talking about tenses. But we're really not. What does passive as a word mean? Right, this one happened in the past. So just not even just in grammar, but like just in the English language, what does that mean?
I mean, it's like saying passive aggressive. They're not directly doing it. They're kind of like underlining doing it.